Both the left and the right harken back with nostalgia to days when things were better for the middle class. The days when wages were strong, unions were fortified, and the future looked bright for future generations. But were things really that good? And if so, what can be done to bring back those glory days? Joining us now to help answer those questions, in Hamilton, Ontario, Charlotte Yates, Dean of Social Sciences at McMaster University. And with us here in studio, Monty McNaughton, PC, MPP for the riding of Lambton-Kent Middlesex. Jim Stanford, economist with the Canadian Auto Workers, and Finn Poshman, Vice President Research at the C.D. Howe Institute. It's good to have Finn, you back, and Jim, you back, and Charlotte, you back, and Monty, you for the first time. Nice to have you here.
Thanks.
I want to start, actually, Monty, by reading something of one of your colleagues. This is Randy Hillier in one of the dozen or so white papers that you folks have put out, laying forward what you believe to be a path to prosperity. This is the one on flexible labor markets, and I'm going to read a little excerpt of it, and then we'll come out and discuss. The path Ontario is on today, says Randy Hillier, and the path it has been on for the last decade bears little resemblance to the paths that were available to me when I began my journey into the workforce almost 4 decades ago. 40 years ago, Ontario's skies shone bright, with endless opportunities in manufacturing, skilled trades, professional services, and a burgeoning service sector. Multiple paths, all led towards a stable middle-class lifestyle. Whether you chose a career in mining, forestry, or agriculture, our resources were attainable through property ownership and development. Let's just pick this apart a bit. Charlotte, let me go to you first. Do you agree, first of all, with Randy Hillier, the Conservative MPP, that that's the way it actually was?
I think it's a lot more complex picture than that. For one thing, 40, 50 years ago, the place of women in the economy was in fact not a lot better. In fact, for many women today, they're in a much better position in terms of economic independence and in terms of their capacity to hold really good jobs that pay a decent wage and benefit. But I do agree that a large number of the middle class jobs are disappearing, and the question is why that would be the case.
And you want to fill in the blanks there?
Well, I think there are a number of things that have happened since then. I think the emphasis on resources, on manufacturing, we've seen a real shift in employment out of those areas, and that's in part marked by there's been growing levels of investment in capital investment in those industries, which means that labor has been displaced by machines. I mean, if one looks at the steel mills in Hamilton, they can probably produce 5 times as much steel as they did 40 years ago with a tenth of the workforce. That's progress. But it does mean then, where else do the new middle class jobs come from? And that's where we need to be looking at emerging sectors. We certainly look at the health and education sectors for the growth of middle class good jobs, and in that case, the good jobs for women. And of course, there are the knowledge-based high-tech jobs that we need to look at. So I think, if anything, there needs to be an understanding that there's a shift in the sectors where the good jobs will be. And then the question is, how do we create the institutions that ensure those are good jobs?
Okay, let me follow up with you on this one, Monty, since it's your colleague's work that we're talking about right here. Do you find it a bit ironic that he's actually hearkening back to a time when governments weren't cutting back but were creating new social programs, when union membership was kind of strong or on the rise, as opposed to today where they seem to be in flight all over the place? There is a bit of irony that Randy Hillier is hearkening back to a better time that didn't feel as conservative as these times, no?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I mean, I agree with what Randy said in our Paths to Prosperity white paper on flexible labor markets. I mean, Ontario clearly has been on the wrong path for the last 10 years. I mean, we've lost 300,000 good, well-paying manufacturing jobs in the province of Ontario. We're no longer the place of choice for businesses to expand and to create jobs. So we need to focus on the fundamentals, get the fundamentals right, and take urgent action to get our economy back on track.
But the things that you seem to be advocating in this white paper seem to be the opposite of what was in place in this province 40, 50 years ago, which presumably was part of what made us strong. Comments?
No, I mean, we have to create the climate for companies to come to, and the current government, whether it's labor laws or whether it's expensive energy or just a growth in government that's unsustainable, that's what's hurting the middle class more than anything.
Jim, the suggestion seems to be that regardless of what was in place 40 or 50 years ago, what we need today may be different in order to create a more prosperous society. They have one approach, What do you think of it?
Well, obviously I don't support the conservative approach in terms of cutting taxes, cutting government programs, and attacking unions. I think that, in fact, unions and government programs were two of the important ingredients behind the rise of the middle class. I think that what we call a middle class job is really just a good job. It's a working class job with decent pay, decent benefits, and a certain degree of security. And those jobs don't fall from the sky, and they aren't created by the free market. They're created through policies and practices and institutions that are aimed at lifting up standards, lifting up all boats, if you like.
But I notice in Charlotte's list of what constitutes some of the good-paying, more secure jobs today, she mentioned health and education. Those jobs tend to be in the public sector.
Yes.
The jobs of many generations ago that were the good-paying jobs in the mills and the factories and whatever were private sector jobs for the most part. So the prescriptions, I'm wondering, from all those years ago, do they work today?
Well, I think that part of the problem has been the structural change in our economy, of course. We have seen the structural change as well as the cyclical decline in manufacturing employment. We've seen the erosion of employment numbers in the resource sector, where traditionally white men anyways could get a decent middle-class job. But I don't think that the idea of middle class is necessarily tied to a particular sector. There's nothing inherent about a manufacturing job that makes it a middle class job. In fact, initially working in a factory was a terrible job, lousy pay, very dangerous. But it was the role of unions, of minimum standards, of government inspectors that lifted up those standards and those practices over time. Similarly, we think of a lousy job today as working, say, in the restaurant industry. But I don't think there's anything inherent about working in a restaurant that has to make it a lousy job. If we had those sorts of rules and standards and policies in place, working in a restaurant could be considered a decent middle-class career. And there are countries in the world, go to Europe, where working in the restaurant industry is considered a vocation. So I don't think it's so much what industries exist in Ontario. I think it's more our overall social approach to regulating the conditions of work. And if we want to create middle-class jobs, we can, even though the structure of the economy has changed.
Finn, it's about the approach. What do you say?
It's the approach and the context. Looking back historically, and just from the past few minutes of conversation, Charlotte and Monty had some very, very good and relevant points, and Jim had one as well. But you need to consider, one, a demographic context. Coming out of the 1950s through the 60s into the early 70s, we were riding a demographic wave, and the economic outlook associated with a strongly growing population in a positive environment where the world economy is growing at the same time is wildly different from a stagnant, relatively stagnant population growth rate, which is what we've seen for the past couple of decades, and much tougher global economic conditions.
What were growth rates 50 years ago?
They were generally around 5 to 7% real, sometimes a little lower. We did have a few recessions, but in a different space more broadly than we see now.
We're predicting a 1.5 for next year.
That's right, and that's not a bad outlook at all. There's something else going on too in the context we're talking about. You could make a fairly decent living by being strong and fit and working in a manufacturing shop, by working in forestry, by working in a mine, a completely different skill set from what it takes to survive in almost any workplace than today. And when we've shifted away, as we have through central and northern Ontario in big, big ways, from the forestry sector in particular, from the resource sector secondarily, which has also been pinched, you need to find, or people need to find ways to reapply themselves, and that speaks to the skill set.
Yet ironically, Steve, the skilled jobs that young people are trained for today themselves are more precarious than ever. So the association of middle class status with having a university degree and a good white collar occupation is no longer there. Lots of people who've got the skills still can't find the middle class job. So I think that reinforces the point that it's how we define work and how we regulate work that is the ultimate issue.
Monty.
I just think when it comes to the provincial government, I mean, the issue is they need to create an environment for businesses to grow and to expand, as I said, but we're heading down the wrong path when you see over the last 12 months, the government sector employment numbers have increased by 48,000 and the private sector has flatlined. We need to get the private sector firing on all cylinders. That's how we're going to create a stronger middle class.
But the theory was if we cut the private sector's corporate taxes enough, they will take that additional money and create jobs with it. And in fact, they haven't done that. They've sat on it. So the theory, some would argue, isn't working.
Well, I mean, I talk to businesses every day as the economic development and trade critic for the PCs, and I can tell you the fundamentals in the province aren't right. Energy bills alone are driving companies away from Ontario, and I think the current government has just given up on manufacturing, and I think that's had a devastating effect for people across this province.
Let me put to Charlotte, though, some of the points, Finn, that you made, which is, Charlotte, we could afford, as a province, as a country, when growth rates were at 5, 6, 7%, to spend more on social programs, to have unions with a stronger voice in society in a way that Finn would suggest we can't today because we're only growing at 1.5 a year. Would you speak to that argument, please?
Well, I agree in so much as, yes, growth rates are down, there's no doubt, and this is a serious concern for Canada and for a number of economies where growth rates in the industrialized West, where Canada has most of its major trading partners, all of those countries are growing at a slower rate. So yes, that's the challenge. Does that automatically lead us to conclude that we should therefore leave it in the hands of business, or in fact it's unions that are the problem? I think that's a huge leap of faith, and let me explain why. If we look at levels of income disparity or inequality at the moment, we find that executive pay in all kinds of areas of the private sector, including the banks at the height of the 2008 crisis, the kinds of bonuses and so on they got suggested there was a lot of wealth there, but it was being concentrated in a very few hands. So one issue is how you use the tax system, and in fact how unions have historically at least played a role in the redistribution of wealth, which is how you create a middle class. You don't create a middle class is not inherent to the labor market, and we know that by looking around the world where there are many labor markets where income inequalities are very extreme and where the middle class is being hollowed out. It's the institutions that regulate the labor market that make that difference, and so it's taxation, it's unions, it's also creating, I would argue, a form of social welfare or a series of social security programs that are perhaps better matched to some of the new challenges in the labor market. And I want to pick up on something that Jim mentioned. There is a growing level of precariousness in employment, not just amongst those in the lower pay, but also into the so-called middle-class jobs and the better high-skilled jobs. The question is, what do we do when those people lose their job or when they're temporarily out of work? We need some kind of social security system that allows them to continue to be contributing members, but for the flexibility of the labor market to coexist. And this suggests not eliminating the social security net, but rather adapting it to new labor market conditions.
Okay, let me go at that union angle again with Monty, because one of the things I think it's fair to say that your white paper on labor is attempting to do is make it tougher on unions in the province, or tougher to unionize. You believe we need more flexibility in the workplace, and therefore, and you think, if I read the papers correctly, you don't believe unions contribute to that. But Charlotte has just said that part of creating a stronger, more secure middle class is unionization. So again, are you at cross purposes here?
No, I mean, listen, I think that workers should have a choice. That's what we're advocating. We don't think that you should have to belong to a union to get a job in the province of Ontario or to keep a job. That's first and foremost. Secondly, I come back to what the government's role is, and that is to create an environment for businesses to grow and to expand and to hire more people. That's how we're going to build a stronger middle class, a better middle class, and to expand jobs in the private sector.
So Finn, is the existence of unions in Ontario in and of itself a drag on economic growth and prosperity?
Oh, not necessarily at all. There's nothing inherently wrong with unions or unionization. They're a perfectly natural way of organizing, or of workers organizing themselves to look after their interests. What happens over time, though, is there's always going to be a shift in the relative position of unions, and this is not an Ontario-specific factor at all. It's bigger than Ontario, bigger than Canada, bigger than North America. one of the things we've seen in the past couple of decades is that the sectors within which private sector unions have been dominant, and manufacturing, resources, and other figure highly here, those sectors have been on more or less on the decline relative to the rest of the economy. So what they're doing is responding to pressures in the global economy and sectoral shifts within the economy. Where in North America in particular, unions have been on the rise is within the public sector. And union growth in North America is primarily dependent on public sector employment, which does not face the same market pressures as the other sectors do.
Understood. But do you think if the province of Ontario were to adapt some of the more, as they call them, flexible labor market ideas in the province of Ontario, that would do anything to encourage job creation, promote economic growth, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, it may help on the margin. The key point, though, is flexibility, and there's nothing that prevents unions, management, and governments finding middle grounds that accommodate a certain amount of flexibility within the workplace. Some, choice is absolutely necessary to that, but there's nothing that says, you can't have unions or they're necessarily wrong. All of these can be accommodated.
Jim, I have to tell you, my hunch is that most people, when they think unionized workplace, do not think flexibility. They think lots of rules. So same kind of question. Is the existence of unions and lots of rules in that workplace a drag on the economy in Ontario?
No, not at all. In fact, I think unions help the economy precisely by creating a middle class that is ultimately an important source of purchasing power and an important strength in terms of social cohesion. The issue of flexibility is a buzzword, Steve, you know this, and being a journalist, that can mean anything you want. When I hear an employer complain that the union isn't flexible enough because we don't let the employer bring in people on the weekend without paying them an overtime for working the extra hours. That's not flexibility. That's an issue about fair compensation. Same goes for the sorts of flexibility that we see in the precarious labor market, where you actually don't have regular hours of work. You're on call, hoping that the employer calls you in, and the employer will deliberately keep an overstaffed role so that people are hungry for hours. That's very flexible
I got to
for
tell
the
you,
employer.
I don't think that's what they're thinking of. I think, and I'm just, listen, this is only from personal
Right.
experience. 20 plus years ago, I worked at the CBC. There were 16 different unions in the CBC.
Right.
That was my job. That was his job. That was somebody else's job. Don't you dare touch that button on that machine. That's my job. Don't you dare clean off the top of that desk. That's another union person's
Right.
job. That sounds to me pretty
That
inflexible.
kind of practice, I think, is a stereotype. I don't know the CBC. I know auto plants, and we have skilled trades job classifications now that have been leaned down and merged. So in a typical auto assembly plant, you'd only have 2 or 3 different defined trades, each of whom has to do a range of different works, and generally one type of production worker who can be assigned or reassigned to every job. That sort of flexibility in terms of the fundamental efficiency of work makes a lot of sense, and there's no inherent reason unions can't do it. In fact, unions can be a positive force in making that happen, because they are the platform from which workers can negotiate a form of flexibility that works for workers as well as employers, and therefore you get some buy-in. If, on the other hand, flexibility is just, deterioration in compensation and working conditions and job security, that isn't the kind of flexibility that we want in our society.
When you use the word, what do you mean it to mean?
Well, I think flexible is pretty straightforward. I mean, people and companies have to be versatile. They have to react quickly to what's happening in the market. I do want to say, though, that over the last year, Ontario has been dead last when it comes to wage growth in Canada. And I think if you look at other jurisdictions around the world, whether it's Australia, the UK, or jurisdictions in the United States, economic growth and job growth is increasing where jurisdictions have modernized their labor laws. That's why I think we need to move quickly in the province of Ontario.
You guys supported the wage freeze, I think, or the concept of a wage freeze. So it's you can't come out and say Ontario's had low wage growth and call that a critique, when in fact one of the reasons is the government has legislated a 2-year wage freeze on a significant part of the labor force, and that wage freeze spills over into the private sector as well. In nursing homes, for example, who end up copying that as the pattern.
Well, I disagree with you there, Jim.
Charlotte, 1 second. We'll get Monty and then you.
I'll disagree with you there, Jim. Clearly the size and cost of government is out of control in the province of Ontario. Tim Hudak and the PCs have been fighting hard for the last year to have a mandatory public sector wage freeze for politicians, for teachers, for firefighters. That's one attempt to control the costs within the Ontario government.
I'm not sure you're being responsive to his point, which is you can't complain that wages haven't gone up in the province of Ontario because of this provincial Liberal government on the one hand, and then on the other hand say, but we are in favor of a wage freeze on 1 million people who live and work in this province who are paid by the public sector.
But
right?
When it comes to the wage freeze, I mean, government workers are making on average 30% more than those in the private sector.
That's absolutely false. That's an absolutely false statement. When you control for education level and the nature of the job, there's virtually no difference between public sector and private sector.
Charlotte, you wanted it.
Well, I think it's absurd to, it's a kind of counterintuitive argument to say that the low wages in Ontario and low growth, and somehow if you adjust to kind of free us of unions, that somehow we would have this spectacular rate of growth. That's just not the case. The point is that it's completely out of context with what's happening in terms of where growth in Canada has been happening. But it's also, there's just there's no actual evidence to suggest that's the case. And so I find this a little frustrating because it's blaming unions for something over which they don't have control. The fact that you could eliminate unions is not suddenly, or reduce their power, is not suddenly going to make Ontario more productive, more competitive, or more attractive to investment. There's a whole series of other things that need to be invested in. And there's a whole series of infrastructure shifts as well as shifts in terms of emphasis in the economy, including the need for an integrated policy that would support manufacturing to make it highly innovative, research intensive, and so on. But those are not things that you would achieve that would purely by stripping away the rights of unions. That's not going to address the actual root of the problem. So it's like saying the solution is this, even though the cause has no relationship to that. So I find that it's a specious argument, and it leads us down the wrong road, and it's not in fact going to lead to better working conditions or better wages for middle class Ontarians, but also for Canadians as a whole. And so I think from there we need to say, what is a Canadian solution to these economic problems? Because we do face real economic problems, that we see a decline in the middle class, we see a growth in precariousness across skill levels. So how do we address those with real solutions that are evidence-based, and we know therefore that they're actually going to work to produce more prosperity for Canadians?
Okay, let me just understand what the relationship between the union movement and the Ontario Conservative Party as it exists today is. And I ask that because probably 30 or 40 years ago, union members would probably, as a result of being in a union, be contributing money to the NDP, but they'd vote Conservative. And the Conservative Party obviously was in power for 42 straight years, in part because unionized people who made a decent living saw their aspirations reflected in the Conservative Party. Would you prefer a union-free Ontario today?
No, I mean, our policy isn't anti-union, it's pro-job. We need jobs in the province of Ontario today. And I mean, as I said at the start of the show, we've lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs over the last 10 years. So clearly, we look at other jurisdictions who are creating jobs, increasing wages in other jurisdictions, and we clearly need change in the province of Ontario. What we've done over the last 10 years is taking Ontario down the wrong path.
You don't see yourself, though, as a party, as being anti-union?
Not at all.
Finn?
Off the top, as a matter of arithmetic and logic, you can't grow the Ontario economy simply by making a policy decision to pay public sector workers more. The world just doesn't work like that, and neither does your wallet. There's a much bigger point, though, and I think Monty touched on it, is the wage growth is not the driver. It's the outcome of a growing economy, of a growing sector. And one of the things that happens is when the environment is favorable to investment, when hiring is happening, then you're going to hire more, and that's going to put upward pressure on demand for labor relative to its supply, and that's going to drive the price at which wages cross and which the market clears. And it's just, just a statement of fact, and that's why flexibility is important. Whatever there are many dimensions to it, but the bottom line is if you've got a parts plant in St. Thomas or Windsor or in Oakville or in Oshawa, you're going to want to win a contract, and you're going to win a bid to produce a car model. And you're going to have to do that on a cost-competitive basis, and labor is just part of that calculation.
I appreciate that, but let me put Jim Stanford's notion of flexibility as exploitation on the table, and let me get your reaction to this. 2 hours from this studio is London, Ontario, and the electromotive company is no more, and the company would say it's because the union wanted too much, and there were other people prepared to do the work for less, and therefore made sense to just shut the place down, and we'll build that stuff elsewhere. If there are always people willing to work somewhere else for less, how does that help the overall prosperity level of our economy?
Well, this isn't a question of wages. There are multiple parts to it. One is demand for what it is that you're producing. Two is the quality and content of it. Do you have an innovative
There was demand
plant?
for those products, and apparently they were very high quality products.
Absolutely, but you still have to win in a competitive marketplace, which is going to be contingent on many, many factors. Proximity to market is one, availability of a trained workforce is another, your capacity to beat out, so to speak, in winning that contract relative to a plant that's not very far away, that might be in Kentucky, that might be in one of the Carolinas. These are all, these are factors that are relevant to every business decision to award a contract, and choices with respect to investment.
And Jim, the flip side is, I got to put the flip side of that argument to you, which is, are workers, are the middle class who worked in that plant better off today because they wouldn't put, in the view of the company, adequate amounts of water in their wine, and therefore they shut it down, and now those jobs are gone forever?
Well, the water in the wine that the company wanted, remember, was to cut the wage in half. So
exactly.
Either the plant closes or you cut your wage in half. Either way, the middle class jobs are gone. Okay, first of all. Here's another twist on the Caterpillar story. Caterpillar had a second plant in Ontario, here in Toronto, that made specialized equipment for boring tunnels. Okay, they announced closure of that a week ago. Monty actually mentioned it in a news release. That was a non-union plant. So here Caterpillar closed the one in London, blaming the union with this phony demand, cut your wages in half or we're gone. We knew they were planning to leave anyway. In Toronto, there was no union to blame, so they just cut the plant. They didn't go through the charade of saying cut your wages in half. So you cannot win a race to the bottom in this world. And we've seen the bottom in Bangladesh, right? This isn't our goal. It shouldn't be any Canadian policymaker's goal to say we're going to try to compete on the basis of being the cheapest. What we have to do is have a set of policies that includes a quid pro quo from the companies. We'll support the companies, we'll cut their taxes, we'll give them investment incentives. But if we're going to build subway tunnels, we're going to use Canadian-made equipment. Or if we're going to dig stuff out of the tar sands in Alberta, we're going to use Canadian-made equipment. Instead of letting a company like Caterpillar profit from those public activities, yet still hurt Canadians and undermine the middle class with their decisions.
I'm not sure. I mean, you tell me, but I'm not sure we can force those companies to use Canadian-made equipment in this era of globalization with free trade, etc.
There are countries all over the world. Norway does it with their oil. Brazil does it with all their resources. Korea does it, and Japan do it with their entire manufacturing sector. It's only Canada who wears the Boy Scout uniform and says, company, if it's cheaper to hire someone for half the rate, go ahead. We won't complain.
Well, we did have a more protectionist economy, Finn, 40, 50 years ago, when our economy was supposedly better. And there was a stronger middle class and more unionized jobs and so on. Now, I know you're not going to advocate that we go back to a more protectionist economy in order to try to relive that glory. But there will be those, and maybe some in the union movement, who say, if you don't want to call it protectionist, let's at least call it, what do you want to call it, Jim?
I wouldn't use the term protectionist.
No.
I wouldn't say go back to where we were. I would say use the levers of policy that are available to today, including public procurement levers, to try and maximize investment in Canada.
How about that?
Well, there are a couple of important factors here on the trade front. First, yes, certainly in the 1960s, generally we were on an upswing, and it got a lot better in the wake of the 1967 Auto Pact that integrated manufacturing across the Canadian-U.S. borders. Between 88 and 89, we brought the free trade agreement between Canada and the U.S. into play. In 92 and 93, it was Canada, U.S., Mexico. Manufacturing was, relatively speaking, an important winner there, and so was employment in the manufacturing sector. In other words, because they did this, North American manufacturers, including Mexico's, did a lot better than they otherwise possibly could have done. They got better at doing what they were doing, more competitive at what they were doing. And if they hadn't opened markets in this way, with this degree of flexibility, we would be in a much, much poorer state than we are now.
Well, let me put this to Charlotte. I mean, the Auto Pact that Finn just referred to, I mean, complicated, but bare bones basic definition. You want to sell a car here, you got to make a car here.
That's right. So it was not a completely free trade. It was what we call managed trade.
Right. Do we need more of that today?
Absolutely, and I think there are various dimensions to that we need to explore, especially now that Canada's investigating a whole or negotiating a whole series of new trade agreements with countries around the world. We need to look at, is it that we need to look at employment standards, that we look at procurement arrangements that are reciprocal, so that if you manage that, yes, if you invest a certain amount, maybe after that the procurement rules are diminished, but I think you need to use that trade leverage. Canada's weakness here is we have a small domestic market, so we have to be prudent in how we engage in those activities, but certainly given the large public investments in infrastructure that we've seen over the last little while, that's a perfect case where we should be looking at what kinds of arrangements we can make to ensure that Canadians do benefit from this through good jobs.
Finn, do we need more managed trade here?
No, I don't think so.
You hate that word, I know.
And there's, the recent history comes to play here. Ontario just not long ago launched a very expensive and misguided green jobs program. It was just struck down at the WTO. It is clearly contrary to WTO rules in the bigger world that we play part
Stand by,
of.
Charlotte. Let him finish, and then we'll get you in.
And it had a lot to do with the procurement aspects of it. These are things that we like to think we've got a little.
To explain this, the World Trade Organization said that the former McGuinty government's green energy jobs strategy was actually in contravention of treaties that we have or agreements that we have because it favored?
There were many constraints associated with green energy, and in particular the procurement aspects. In other words, you have to tie federal or rather provincial procurement to certain features of the underlying contracts. And this is something that the world has really rather moved on from, because we know it's a big world out there. None of us are going to make ourselves collectively richer by paying more or by doing things less efficiently than we could do otherwise. That's what trade is about. It's the fundamental part of the development of the Western civilization over many centuries.
Charlotte, quick comeback on the WTO.
I'm sorry, but if you look at trade with Japan, you look at trade with Korea, South Korea, but you even look at the case of the procurement case, there are in fact ways in which that procurement could have been done in ways that it would not have contravened with the WTO. It just happens to be the particular way in which the Ontario government framed that particular procurement arrangement. The point is, even with the new European deal, do you really think that the Europeans are going to give us wide open access to their agricultural markets? And yet, we may find that our own farmers, because of that arrangement, may in fact be disadvantaged. So I think to suggest that everybody around the world is completely opening their borders for completely free trade is a misunderstanding of what's actually happened in trade negotiations. Countries look after their own interests. That's not to say that they're not interested in trade, but they will not engage in trade at all costs to their own citizens.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Canada seems to be willing to engage in that form of trade.
Let me put a new topic on the table here, and that is taxes. Monty, I want to start with you. A few generations ago, we had much higher personal income tax rates, and the level of equity, we were a more equitable society, I think is what I'm trying to say. And even though I think what were the highest personal income tax rates once upon a time in the state? 70%. Okay, and we're obviously a long way from that today. And we have a less equitable society today. So what would you want to do with personal income taxes?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm a believer that tax cuts create jobs. I don't think that'll be a surprise to anyone here. But the question is actually twofold. I mean, one, first of all, we need to reduce the size and cost of government, so we need fewer people working in the public sector.
But talk to me about income taxes.
And then secondly, once we do that, then we need to look at reducing taxes. I mean, I think our leader, Tim Hudak, has put out 3 potential tax cuts. He's listening to people now, and that could be a corporate tax cut, income tax cut, or an HST reduction. And we'll clearly outline our plan when the election comes around.
How much revenue would the Treasury forego by making those tax cuts that you've suggested?
It would be in the neighborhood of $750 to $800 million.
So the deficit would be nearly $1 billion bigger if we bring those tax cuts in.
Well, listen, we're going to reduce the size of government. I mean, when the McGuinty-Wynne Liberals took power in 2003, there were about 900,000 people working in the broader public sector. Today, it's 1.2 million. Clearly, it's unsustainable. If we reduce our costs, we're going to pass along some savings to the taxpayers.
Jim, if we believe, I'm not sure everybody does, but if we believe that having a relatively equitable society where you don't have some at the very top, the 1%, as it were, having control over the levers of everything else, and the other 99% basically fending for themselves. What do we need to do on income taxes, in your view?
Yeah. And there's a lot of evidence now to show why we don't want that. It isn't just a bleeding heart concern for the poor. The international evidence from peer-reviewed scientific journals in fields like epidemiology or life expectancy or criminality show that societies with much wider gaps between the rich and the poor actually pay for it. They pay for it in shorter lives, higher health costs, higher policing costs, and so on. So this isn't just a bleeding heart issue. Societies are actually stronger when everyone has a chance to participate. Income tax plays a very important role, both coming in and going out, if you like. Income tax obviously is a tax that collects proportionately more income from higher income families. And then the benefits that are funded from income taxes, whether that's income transfers for lower income people, like say a child tax benefit or something like that, or direct public service provision, the healthcare and education and so on. Either way, you're enhancing the life potential, the consumption potential of the people at the bottom. So to give you an example, in Canada, the ratio of the top fifth of society to the bottom fifth on your market income, that's your before tax, before government income, is 53 to 1. 53 to 1 is the ratio. Once you start adding in the transfer payments from government and deducting the income taxes that people pay, you get to 9 to 1. So the income tax and the programs that income taxes support are incredibly important at narrowing that gap.
Just curious, where would you want to be? You don't want to be at 53. You happy with 9?
Well, 9 to 1, personally, I think that's still a pretty big darn gap. Although you can actually take it lower than that if you count the value of the healthcare services, education services, and so on that people get, assuming that everybody shares in those, then you actually take it down to 6 to 1.
Now, here's where I say, however, Finn, as a part of the budget negotiations last year, you'll remember that then Premier McGuinty and NDP leader Horwath talked, and one of the things that came out of that was a surtax on the, I think those making more than $500,000 a year, something like that, $450 a year. And the argument was, rich people are smart and they'll figure out a way not to have to pay that, and you won't get as much of that in return as you thought you would anyway. So can you talk to us about the diminishing returns of raising taxes on the wealthy, if you think that's the case?
Well, folks who have resources are always going to find ways to be able to structure their affairs so as to reduce their tax burdens. And again, that's the incentive built into the system. And I think Jim made a very, very good point that our tax and benefit system does a terrific job of reducing the degree of inequality that there is between market incomes and post-tax and transfer incomes. And I think Jim made a very important point. And these, of course, are to some extent questions of degree. In Canada, as with many Western countries, we had very, very high degrees of income inequality and wealth or asset inequality up through and after World War II. During the subsequent boom periods, the degree of income inequality in our societies has come way, way down. In Canada, beginning roughly around the 1990s, it started to tick up a little more income inequality by the beginning of the 2000s than there was a decade ago. In the last 5 or 6 years, though, we've seen a clear downward trend in the degree of income inequality, post-tax and transfer, in Canada, and it leads one to ask, what exactly is the problem here that we want to address?
Okay, we got about a minute and a half to go here, and Monty, let me ask you, if you will be presenting a platform in the next election campaign to the people of Ontario saying we can resurrect the hopes of the middle class if we do X, Y, and Z. You don't have to tell me X, Y, and Z, just tell me X. What's the most important thing in your view?
Well, we have to create an environment where businesses will expand, the private sector will hire people, and I think we have to start by balancing the books in the province of Ontario. We cannot continue down the path of high deficits, a growing debt, and runaway spending.
Even though the province of Ontario is 40% of the Canadian economy, you know, we're not Europe, we're not the United States. Those are the hugest drivers on what happens here. Can provincial policy make that much of a difference?
Absolutely. I mean, 10 years ago, the debt in the province of Ontario was about $130 billion. By 2019, 2020, it's going to be around $550 billion. That's a debt crisis. And in order to solve our jobs crisis, we need to get our fiscal house in order.
And I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last word today. I want to thank everybody for participating in our program, starting with Charlotte Yates from McMaster University in Hamilton. Charlotte, as always, good to have you on the program.
Nice to hear you, Steve.
To you too. And Monty McNaughton, first time on our program here. Monty, thanks for coming in. He's the PC MPP for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. Are you the youngest member in the legislature?
I'm the fourth youngest.
Fourth youngest.
Yes.
How old are you anyway?
36.
Good for you. Okay. Jim Stanford from the Canadian Auto Workers and Finn Poshman from the C.D. Howe Institute.
Good to see you, Steve.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.